I must begin by thanking Sunil Kumarji for being my host here. Whenever I come to San Diego, I came last year, I come this year again. He's been an excellent host for me. And secondly, for the great introduction that he has given for me. I don't deserve all of those compliments that he has offered you. I must also thank Bharatiya Vichar Manch for this opportunity of speaking here. And all of you for gathering today here on a Sunday morning, which is not very easy, I know. The issue we are going to talk about is not a very pleasant issue. It's about the way during the last about a century, the space for the Hindus in India, and Hindus, in fact, when I talk about Hindus, I tend to include, at least in numbers, Sikhs, Jains and Buddhists also in that phrase. That space is getting restricted. Their numbers are getting restricted, their demographic space is getting severely limited. I'll try to show you the numbers. And before we begin that, you come to the first. Next. Before we talk about that issue of the numbers, I want you to have a look at this map. And this you take it in lieu of Mangalacharan. This is the map of India as placed in the world, geographically. And if you look at India, the triangle below, the peninsula below, and look behind it, you can see imagine the kind of vast expanse of Himalayas that's behind it. And it's holding India from three sides. In fact, one of the geographers who was talking about this map, one of the things he said was that when you look at this map, it seems as if this aged old Himalaya, though Himalaya is not considered very old, is holding the daughter India with its both hands. That's how this land is built. And you can keep on talking about it because it is said that Himalayas, Indian land is protected by the Himalayas and it's also made by the Himalayas. The rivers coming from the Himalayas which have created this extreme fertility that India represents. And it is said that as you look at this map, the Himalayas are shared between China and India. Himalayas is as much of China as of India. But the geographers say that in terms of location it may be as much of India and China, but in terms of its boundary it's all India's. Because whatever water falls on the Himalayas, whether it is in the southern slopes or in the northern slope, it all comes into India. It doesn't, not a drop goes on the other side. Behind that is the desert is the belt. It's not but in this particular context, what I want you to particularly notice is that there is this three sides covered by the Himalayas, and below that, for a long distance, for thousands of miles, there's not really any big land nearby. Well, even if you want to go to the Gulf, it will be several thousand miles you'll have to pass. It used to be said by geographers in the early, even up to the early 20th century, that it's created like a fortress. There's not easy for anybody from the north to enter India, and it's not easy for anybody from the south, from the seas, to enter into this land. It's been always very difficult. In the Himalayas, I think the eastern side is relatively low. So there could be a possibility of people coming in. But eastern side is highly forested. It rains heavily. In fact, I and my family last year went to Arunachal Pradesh, and from Tinsukia we were going to Devmali. From Duryadhan it will be about 30 kilometers. It takes hours to cross just that much of forest in the modern times. We were in a jeep. It was so difficult to go from Duliajan to Devmali even today. On the western side, as is well known, there are a few passes, high passes, but they have been known since history, for all history, and they have always been defended. So it was very rarely, though we are always taught that India was continuously invaded, people came from here, and that India is a land where everybody seems to have come from outside. It was very, very rare that anybody could pass through these great barriers and enter the fortress of India, the natural fortress of India. And those who passed and came, they, in fact, if you read about the Alexander community, one of the great things that makes Alexander great in the writings of his people, so is that he was able to come into India. Coming into India was the task of gods. And it was not at all easy, and Alexander became Alexander the Great, not because he passed through Europe, which everybody could do, or through what's called the Middle Asia. It's because he was able to enter India. Next slide. So that is one important thing about Indian landmass, that it is naturally highly protected landmass. From pre-modern times, in the pre-modern times, it would have been extremely difficult for anybody to enter into India. The other important thing is that this landmass, which lies below the Himalayas up to the sea, is extremely flat. I don't think there will be many places where the elevation will be about 3,000 feet. The Vindhyas is the only barrier you can see from the Himalayas up to the sea. And Vindhyas has never been a high barrier, and there are these Puranic stories about how it was ensured that Vindhyas will not become a barrier in passing through India. This land, it is flat and it's highly cultivable. Almost, this number is given here, 50% of Indian land mass is cultivable. That Indian Union, the total area is 329 million hectares. Out of that, 170 million hectares, which is nearly 60%, is cultivable. You don't find such land masses in the world. America is very special. In America, there can be areas where this land, this kind of, within California, it could be possible that maybe 50% is cultivable, but that is very recent. It was not even the early 20th century, that much wouldn't have been cultivable in California. India has been cultivable at this level throughout. So that makes India, external borders are secured naturally, and internal there is a widespread fertility. Most countries there will be a core area, and there will be the outwards area where nothing grows. For example, China, there will be the eastern coastal belt where everything happens, and all of the west will be desert, but India is not like that. India, every part of India is cultivable, every part is fertile, every part makes it possible for life to occur and grow there. This is important. This is a very rare, in fact, that's what most geographers in the early 20th century would have said. There's a very rare landmass in the world where this kind of large-scale fertility, unbroken fertility is available over such distances. Next. And within that landmass, you have a fertile land, you have a secure border, people do not come and enter inside it. Obviously, for centuries you are doing it, you will grow a civilization, you will grow a culture which is as uniform as your land is. And this uniformity of Indian culture has been noticed by people. Today will quote Kingsley Davis, who is considered the first, more or less the first modern demographer of India. He wrote a book, The Population of India and Pakistan. There was no Bangladesh at the time, in 1951. Well, I think today anybody starting working on the demography of India will begin with Kingsley Davis. Kingsley Davis is a very important American demographer. He was in University of Southern California for several years, and he was designated one of the most distinguished demographers and philosophers of the 20th century by the American Society of Philosophy. Kingsley Davis, in his book on the Indian demography, writes this. Let me read it out. Indian ideas and institutions, taken as a whole, resemble those of no other people. They have a peculiar shape and flavor of their own. They have tended to transform and absorb any foreign elements that trickled into this region. For India, though politically conquered by outsiders, was never culturally conquered. And then he says, this peculiar culture has to some degree penetrated and pervaded nearly every part of what is geographically India. It has everywhere been affected by local indigenous variations, but neither the geographical nor the social barriers inside the subcontinent have been sufficient to prevent the widespread diffusion of a common basic culture which, despite great variations, is peculiar. This is how the world used to think about us. This is 1951. And today also, I think this should be compulsive for every Indian to pass through this uniform land, travel through it as much as you can, to feel the uniformity of the geography and to feel the uniformity of culture that prevails. There can be different languages, as he's saying. There can be different dresses. There can be different food habits. But Indians think the same way as he's going. They work with the same ideas and institutions all over India, whether it's in Arunachal or Tamil Nadu or Kashmir. There's extraordinary uniformity which an outsider can sense immediately, which Kingsley Davis did at the time. For insiders, of course, we will be able to see much more differences. But outsiders even today, and if we ourselves pass through different parts, keep an eye for it, we'll sense that they're talking, they may be using different words, they're saying the same thing in every part of India. And of course, this uniqueness of Indian culture, this uniformity of Indian civilization, this is anchored in what we call dharma, what we call Sanatana Dharma. That's in fact what the Indians think, what the way the Indians' ideas are, the complete collection of those ideas is what Sanatana Dharma is. In fact, it has been highly systematized, that is our great fortune. But this may or may not be systematized. This is what Sanatana Dharma is, what prevails in the minds of India. And as I said, not many could pass through the barriers that separate India from the rest of the world. But those who passed through them, they invariably became part of the Indian civilization in Europe. They accepted the ideas. In fact, in many cases, they became great devotees of the Indian civilization. They took it much farther outside the borders of India. Next. So this homogeneity of India, of its geography, of its civilization, of its culture, my personal feeling is, this may not be very correct, remained more or less intact up to 1280, which is in a way the defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan in 1192 is in a way a landmark in India, as a milestone. India before that, after that, are two different entities. With the defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan, Islam came into India, was able to have a foot. They were fighting for it for several hundred years before that. But with that, they were able to have a foothold in the center of India, in Delhi, and then start moving further. And that coming of the Islam into India was the first source of heterogeneity in India. Till then, it was an homogeneous culture, homogeneous people. We don't talk speak like that in India. It's not politically correct to say that. In our school textbooks, in fact, even the latest policy statement on education of our own government, hundreds of times it talks about the diversity of India, the heterogeneity of India. There is no diversity of India. There is no heterogeneity of India. Those diversities and heterogeneities are only waves on the uniformity of Sanatana Dharma and this geography that really prevails there. Anyway, Islam was the first source of homogeneity, heterogeneity, and it happened because, if you read any one of the historical books, Islamic rulers in India were insistent that they will not get absorbed into the civilization milieu of India as the previous invaders did. This was a conscious insistence that we will remain separate. And that insistence is till today, and we'll talk about it as we move further into this talk. And then the British came, that was several hundred years after the British brought Christianity, which is the second source of heterogeneity in India. But it is not so much that the British were able to spread Christianity. Even today, there are less than 3% Christians in India. What they were able to do was to hit at the roots of the homogeneity of India, to convince the Indians, that this homogeneity is not important, or this homogeneity is actually meaningless, or it actually doesn't exist. And that what you should need to celebrate is differences, the heterogeneities that you celebrate, and your civilization principles are of no value. That is what created even larger heterogeneity in India than what the Muslims were able to do. So what I'm going to do in this talk, this was only by way of introduction, is to measure the heterogeneity as it has developed over the last 100 or 130 years. Basically what I'm going to measure is that how the Christians and the Muslims, their numbers have increased over the last 130 years compared to the rest, whom I am calling Indian religionists, which are put together for the purpose of this talk, they are put together in a single category. Next. So this is the basically the religious profile of India over the last 130 years. Yes.
This is all undivided India?
Yes. This is undivided India, as we saw. We'll come to the divided India. In 1881, there were less than 20% Muslims. In 2011, there are nearly 31% Muslims in the Indian subcontinent, if you want to call it that way. We are calling this India and the current entity as Indian Union. No, that is a big number. In just the space of about 1 century, about 130 years, the mainstream religion, followers of religion come down from 79 to 67, lose about 12 percentage points in the course of just about 1 century. And Muslims gain about 10 percentage points, and Christians gain about 1.5 percentage points. This doesn't happen in history. With small nations, small civilizations, it happens, it has happened. But for a large nation of the level of India, this loss is not a small loss. If you want to put it in perspective, it is said that at the time of Akbar, and when Akbar was ruling, Islam had been ruling in India for about 400 years, from the Sultanate onwards. In those 4 centuries of Islamic rule, the maximum you can say is that there were 1/6 of India, which is about 16%, had become Muslim. But that 1/6 is the Mughal India, which was never the whole of India. It will be, if you had counted the whole of India, it will be much less than 16%. And that was 400 years it took, 400 years of active, you want to call it proselytization, conversion, but active, violent conversion created that 16%, if it was 16%, in 400 years. We have added 12% to that in the modern 130 years. This is not a small change that is occurred in India. But this is about what, as you said, is what we call the undivided India. But that is what is the important entity. In terms of civilizations, the meaningful entity is the undivided India. This political India of today is not a meaningful entity either in geography or in civilizational terms. We'll just go to the next slide. So we had these 13 points, and we thought we'll just do a blind kind of projection. And it says that by about 2061, in the undivided India, Indian religionists will become a minority if the trends of the previous years continue. This is our estimation. May not be very good because this is not how demographers do this kind of calculation. But the United Nations estimates of 2015 are, if you take their middle projections, according to, if you take those numbers, then in 2061, on what is the Indian subcontinent, if Indian religionists will be around 57%. I'm saying it will be less than 50%. It will be around 57%, which is also not a very attractive thought to carry with us. Next. So that is about the whole of India. And if you look at these three separated entities, incidentally, in that book of Kingsley Davis, he repeatedly and very strongly asserts that there's only one reason for the division of India, for the partition of India. And that one reason is demography, religious demography. It is that some parts of India, the Muslims had become majority. That is the only reason that India was partitioned. There's no other political, no other geographic reason to justify that. And that's what Kingsley Davis has been repeatedly asserting in this book. Incidentally, Kingsley Davis was able to say all this because 1951 was the time when India was just got independence. And whole of the world, and particularly America, they were very convinced that India is going to become a very great nation in the next decade or so. And they wanted it to happen. I don't know whether today they want it to happen or not. That time they really wanted it to happen. And the world wanted it to happen. That India should emerge as a great nation. And given the kind of wealth India had, and the kind of background India was coming from, everybody in the world was convinced that they're going to do it. And that's why Kingsley Davis was talking in such glowing terms about India, because it was possible that time. They saw a glowing future for India. Okay. Coming back to the same stuff. Yeah. So if we look at these three different, the previous one? This. Yeah. In the Indian Union, look at the lower three rows. In 1901, there were about 87% Indian religionists. In 41, there were 84%. And partition took us back to 87% because people moved out, population moved out. And now we are back to below 84%. So whatever little gain had happened as a result of the partition in terms of the religious balance in the country, that has been more than utilized in the last half a decade. But that is still 4% down. As we go along, this is for the whole of Indian Union. Particular parts of India, the situation is much worse, which we'll come to. There are many places where the Muslim growth would have been very large places. In the last 50 years, they would have increased by about 12 to 13 percentage points. We'll come to that. In Pakistan, there were about 16% Indian religionists at the beginning of the century, beginning of the last century. They were 20% in 1941. This is one region of India, undivided India, where the Indian religiousness was increasing, their proportion was increasing. Part of the reason was that the British had, as a matter of policy, decided to encourage cultivation and irrigation in what is West Pakistan now. And wherever you want to do irrigation and cultivation, Sikhs will reach there. So large number of Sikhs reached in what is now Western Pakistan to open up new lands and do new cultivation. So this proportion you see rising from 16% to 20%. And then it went down to less than 2% and has remained now. So this Pakistan part of it, Pakistan part of India is, for all practical purposes, it is no more accessible to the mainstream religion of the Indian civilization. They are excluded from it, more or less. And Bangladesh part of India, there were 34% in 1901 Indian religions, much more than in Pakistan. There they had come down to about 30% before partition. After partition, the transfer of populations was not as complete as in the northern part, and so they had come down to 23. But in the over the course of last 5 decades, from 23%, the Indian religions in Bangladesh are down to less than 10%. Now this again is a very large phenomenon, that at the time of partition, it happened in Pakistan that people, Indian religions came down from 20% to less than 2%, is in a way understandable because there was a climactic violence at the time. But how do you understand this? This is continuous, persistent violence which will bring down the proportion of religions 30% to 10%, less than 10% in about 5 decades. And I always wonder that this is happening. Why is there no news anywhere? No great literature is being written on this, because many families would have been destroyed. Much would have happened there, for people don't convert so easily. People don't even leave their land so easily. So if Bangladeshi Hindus have come back to India, that is a tragedy. And if they have converted, that is a tragedy. But where is the tragedy in literature or on news? Why is it that we don't, that Sunilji is saying that we don't celebrate? We don't even mourn. This is very strange, that at least we should be mourning about the death of Hindus in Bangladesh, if we can't do anything else. Anyway, next. Beyond this, we will talk about only the Indian Union. These are little more, the same numbers, little more detailed. We'll go to the next slide. In Indian Union, I was giving the percent numbers. This is the decadal growth rates. In 1951-61, Indian religions grew by 21% in that decade. And then there was a rise to 24, then to 24. And then after that, the growth rate started coming down. This is important because we don't realize that Indian population began growing after independence. It will happen anywhere, because if you look at the census figures from 1901 or even before 1871 to 1941, you will see that Indian population is not growing, because if there's a growth in one decade, there will be a decline in the next, and they talk about this ladder-like form graphs of the Indian population prior in the British period. When the British left, the first fruit of freedom is always a demographic dividend, the population's rise. But this happened only for 2 decades. From the 3rd decade, the population growth started declining. And now it's come down to 17%. But what I want to draw attention to is that the gap between the Muslim growth and the Hindu growth, it was 21 and 24 in the first decade, 23 and 30 in the second decade, 24 and 30 in the third decade, 22 and 32 in the fourth decade, the gap is widening. There's a difference, but the gap in the two is widening. In the first decade, Muslims grew 15% more than the Hindus. Second decade, they grew 29% more than the Hindus. It is not the Hindus, Indian religion. Last decade, they have grown 48% more than the Hindus. And in all the 3 decades, they have grown more than 40% higher than the Hindus. So it is said quite often that, look, much of the demographers will tell you that, look, these issues of demography are temporal, that this only few decades the Muslims will be growing faster than the Hindus. And then there will be a demographic transition for everybody, and everybody will start growing much less as everybody grows, everybody develops. In fact, this demographic transition theory is also Kingsley Davis, that he is supposed to be the discoverer, the first person who proposed that. But it is true that Muslim growth rates are also coming down. But what is important is not the absolute growth rate, is the relative growth rate. And the gap between the Muslim growth rate and the Hindu growth rate, and the gap is widening. The gap is, in fact, I'll show you, in Kerala, where the growth rates of everybody have come down, because it's supposed to be a very developed, very educated state. The gap between the Hindus and Muslim growth, or the Christian and Muslim growth, is much wider than the average of India. Okay, let's go to the next slide. It's another measure of the gap between the growth of Hindus and Muslims. The number of children per 100 of the population. And in India as a whole, there are less than 16 children in 2001 per 100 of the population. In Muslims, it was around 19. There was a gap of about 3 children per 100 of the population. In 2001, the gap is slightly more than 3, more than what earlier it was. Next slide. That was whole of India. The gap in some of the states is unimaginable. And this is the number of children per 100 of population. Indian Union, I said, is 13 and 16.4. 13 for the Indians and 16.4 for the Muslims. In Haryana, it is 12.7 and 21.7. 9 extra children per 100 of population. In Jammu and Kashmir, it is about 6 extra children. In Assam, there is about 7 extra children per 100 of population. West Bengal is about 5. Kerala is also about 6 extra children. And I have put the Arunachal, Manipur, Nagaland because these are the places where the Christian growth is very high also. And next. I don't know this, how much you will be able to see. This is the map of India. The green are Muslims and the blue are Christians. And this is how Indian Union now looks when you look at the distribution of Muslims and Christians in India. Numbers are, I'm afraid, not very visible. But you start from the north, there's the Jammu Kashmir, which is Kashmir Valley, we'll talk about it more detail, is entirely now Muslim. And there are, I think, about 8.5 million Muslims in Kashmir Valley. The total of 172 million, out of the 8.5 are there. Then after that you get this Uttar Pradesh. Western Uttar Pradesh is looking much more densely Muslim. Western Uttar Pradesh, and there are parts of Eastern Uttar Pradesh which are very densely Muslim. But whole of Uttar Pradesh accommodates about 38 million Muslims, about 3.8 crores out of that. And then there is Bihar, which has about 17 million Muslims. Then you get an area which is much more densely populated Muslims. You come to Jharkhand and West Bengal, and then Assam. All this put together, the Muslim proportions are high. Out of the 172 million Muslims in India, maybe my guess is, I think 111 million, 110 million, 11 crores will be in this region. And the growth rates are very high, which we will talk about. The relative growth rate is very high. Then you come There's about 3 crore Muslims, 30 million Muslims in Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka region, in the south of India. There the growth rates except in Kerala are not very high. We'll talk about that. Then in the western flank of India, the remaining Muslims, that is 11,415, the remaining 3 crores or 30 million are in the western flank of India. Gujarat, Rajasthan, Delhi, Maharashtra, that part. And there also, in Haryana, the growth rates are very high, we'll talk about that. Not elsewhere. Christians, out of the 28 million Christians that are there, about 8 million are in this northeastern region, where northeast, they are the people of India, as a northeast is concerned. All of it is Christian majority, almost all of North India, excluding Assam and Tripura, or Northeast India, all of Northeast India. Then there are about, this Jharkhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh has about 3 billion Christians. And that is where in addition to Northeast India, this is the region where the growth is very fast. And we'll discuss that. Then the Kerala and Tamil Nadu, between them, will accommodate almost all the remaining Christians of India. The rest is very small. Next. We'll begin by we'll go geographically, start with the Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu Kashmir has 3 regions. There's the Ladakh region, Kashmir Valley region, and the Jammu region. Kashmir Valley, 96% is Muslim now. But Ladakh also, there's not much of population, but there's also Muslim majority area now. 46% are Muslim. Kargil part is almost much more Muslim. Leh doesn't have too much of population, it's largely Buddhist. But what is most interesting is that even in the Jammu region, there are about 34%, 33.5% Muslims. This Rajouri, Poonch, Doda and Kishtwar region is a heavily Muslim regions of Jammu also. Next one. So when you look at these 3 parts of Kashmir, one of the issues is the relative population of these 3 parts, because that decides the politics of the place. Jammu naturally should be much more densely populated, because Jammu is the plains region. And Kashmir Valley is a very small place. But as you look at this, 55% of the population of Jammu and Kashmir is in the Kashmir Valley. And 43%, less than 43% is in the Jammu region, which is much larger region and much more fertile, much more easier region than. And from around 1981, the proportion in the Kashmir Valley region has been rising. This is an important political issue there, because and most of the Jammu Kashmir people believe that this is manipulation of data, to ensure that they retain their majority in the legislature. Next. Now look at the religious profile of these 3 regions. Look at the lower 4 on the last 3 rows. In 1911, in Kashmir Valley region, there were 94% Muslims. They remained around 94% up to 1961. Then they went, 71 there was no census there. 91 they went to 95%. 91 also there was no census. And they went up to 97%. Now there's a little decline. And the Hindus in that region, this is Hindus and Sikhs together, they were about 5.57% in 61, they were more before that. In 81 they became 5%, and there was a sudden decline to 2.77%. This is what that great exodus of Hindus from Kashmir. It was substantial exodus, but reduced their percentage in the valley from 5% to 2%. 8%. But look at the Jammu region. There the Muslims, after partition, came down from 50 to 38%, which was to happen because it's part of the Punjab region. They further came down to 29%. But after 81, every decade, their proportion in the Jammu region has been rising. Their proportion in the valley region is high, that is correct. But in the Jammu region, they've gone from 29.6 to 33.5% in the space of 3 decades, which is very high growth, relative growth. And that I think somebody should look into more detail, what is happening in Jammu, that the proportion of Muslims is rising there in this manner. Kashmir Valley, we said that the Hindus have increased during the last decade, but that increase is actually not very relevant. There were 1 lakh Hindus in 2001. There are 1,68,000 in this current census. But among this 1,68,000, there are only 15,000 females, and there are only 5,000 children. And look at that age pyramid of this. The right side, which shows the women, is almost vacant. And the left side, you see only adults there. So it is really not a population resident in the society of Kashmir Valley. This is workers and military men and police people who have gone from outside, and they have no families. And they are all literate adult workers. So really in Jammu, in the Kashmir region, there are no Hindus as far as that society is concerned. They're really, this 1,68,000 is not meaningful in this sense. Next.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Why we have to count outsiders in this population who go there temporarily?
I didn't say outsiders. If I said I'm wrong. No, they're outsiders to that society is all I'm saying. They're not part of that society.
Why we have to include them?
That's the way the census is measured.
Yeah.
Census would include all the rest.
Why we have to count
No, nobody is excluding. I am saying, no, census doesn't exclude them. Census gives the number of Hindus. I am trying to explain to you that these are not families settled there. They are not families settled there. Families that were settled there have been all removed from there. It's only adult literate workers who have to go, men workers who have to go there to work, who we are counting in the census. As far as that society is concerned, Hindus as of now have no place in it. They used to have a place of about 5% earlier.
I mean, this kind of a thing has been known for a long time. Not the details to most of us, but the general idea is a pretty well-known fact. The question is what needs to be done about it. Instead of knowing every little detail of every little district, doesn't do good to anybody.
Excuse me.
I know.
Hello, excuse me for a second. Could you please hold your questions till the end? Let the gentleman finish his lecture.
Anyway,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, I will be giving only the details and I'll leave the answers to what is to be done to you. I am only a numbers man. I am only a numbers man. And I believe that when you know the details, you also know the answers. Without knowing the details, you really don't get the answers. That's what I've been taught during my physics. But I will come to that. We'll come to that. Next. Next is Punjab and Haryana. When we move from Jammu Kashmir, next region is Himachal, which is small. Punjab Haryana during the partition, most of the Muslims moved that side, and most of the Hindus and Sikhs came from there to the Indian part. So there should not be any Muslims there in theory. And there were really no Muslims. In the beginning, there was 0.84% in 71. But there's been considerable growth from 0.85 to 1.93, about 2%. And there are two reasons for this growth. Let me go into the more details. Next. Next. In Punjab, because we started with Guru Gobind Singh, in Punjab there is a region called Malerkotla. And Malerkotla is important because when in Sirhind, the Wazir Khan decided to kill the young sons of Guru Gobind Singh. In that court of Wazir Khan, it is only the Nawab of Malerkotla who objected, who said that this is great injustice if you're doing this. In return for that, he was given Abhadan. He was, Malerkotla was blessed by the Guru that the Muslims there will never be molested and remain there. So they were not molested even after 5 years of this event of, in 1705 this occurred, this killing of the Sahibzadas. In 1710, Banda Bahadur avenged it and he destroyed all that region. Even the Nawab of Malerkotla also died in that war because he fought on behalf of Wazir Khan. But Malerkotla Muslims in the city were not molested even by Banda Bahadur. And at the partition also they were protected by the Sikhs. So they remained there, and Malerkotla is one region where the Muslims remained and their numbers have increased substantially. And that is not an issue of worry. What is an issue of worry is that in the rest of Punjab also, there has been considerably increase of Muslims. And there are places in Punjab where sarpanches are Muslims or Christian. And that's part of the way the economy is developing there. So part of the reason is that we are not careful. Next slide. So this was the number I was giving, that in Malerkotla Tehsil, the proportion of Muslims has gone up from 15 to 22. This is fairly large. But in other parts of Punjab, the Muslims have increased from 53,000 to 356,000. About 7 times they have increased in the last, and 356,000 Muslims in Punjab outside Malerkotla is a very large number. I will not talk about distance at this point. Next. Haryana again is a region where the Muslims were evacuated from. But Haryana, their growth has been very fast. From 4 up to 91, you don't see that much growth. But the next 2 decades, we have gone up from 4.64 to 7.7%. And again, there's a history to this growth. Give me the next slide, please. Haryana has a region called Mewat. And Mewat, Muslims are supposed to be very old, from the time of Firoz Shah Tughlaq that they were converted. And they were supposed to be highly integrated into the Rajput society of Haryana. And they're supposed to have fought on the side of Hemu against the invaders. But in the modern times, this Tabligh movement started there. This will be around 1900, around 1960, that Muhammad Ilyas and his father, they came from Kandra and started this Tabligh movement, which has become a worldwide movement. So Mewat now is a very rigidly Muslim area. And the growth there has been phenomenal. And you go to the next slide. In Mewat district of Haryana, the Muslim percentage was 74.8%, has gone to 79.2%, which is about 5 percentage points in just 1 decade. Next. Mewat is larger region than in Haryana. There are parts of Alwar and parts of Rajasthan, which Bharatpur, that come into it. In that, the core region, the numbers have gone from 6.3 lakhs to 9.11 lakhs in the course of last 1 decade. Last 2 decades, from 91 onwards, there has been very consistent growth of Muslims in the Mewat region, and it's a very difficult region. My wife went to work there for a while, and I had spent a few months there, and you are in a different country. Next. But this growth there is phenomenal. It's strange that is happening in Haryana. Then we come to UP, which is the, of course, heartland. As I said, 40 million Muslims are in Uttarakhand, of about 172 million. 40 million are in UP and Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand doesn't have too many, most of it UP. The proportion there has increased from 15 to 19, which overall is not that disturbing. It is similar to all over Indian Union, which it has to be because Muslim UP is a very large part of India. Whatever the general trends of India are, will be the trends of UP. Next. But what is disturbing is that much of this population is in that western belt, which is Saharanpur, Hardwar, Muzaffarnagar, Jyotiba Phule Nagar, Rampur, this area. And then some of it in the Shravasti, Bahraich, Rampur area, which are very highly concentrated Muslim populations. And in these two areas, especially in the western UP area, the growth has been very large. Let me just give you the number. Next. In 41, there were 32% Muslims there. Today, they came down to less than 30% in 51. And now from 30% it's gone to more than 40%, less than 30% to more than 40%. This is very high growth in this western UP region. And this is because, after all, this is also politically significant area for Hindus. This also becomes an issue of almost continuous political tensions in that area, which you would have heard of in the recent past. Next. In that central area, the eastern UP area also, there was growth earlier, but one positive thing is from the last decade, it seems that in the eastern part of UP and parts of Bihar and parts of Jharkhand, the growth of Muslims has stalled, but only parts of those. And there are very many districts where this time you see that the Hindus, the proportions are higher than the last year. And the reason, as far as I know, these are areas of demographic contention. And because of the kind of politics which has gone on over the last 20 years, Hindus are feeling more encouraged to demographically and otherwise assert themselves, which is showing in numbers in those areas where otherwise the Muslim population is not very large. Next. Uttarakhand is another area where whole of Uttarakhand the Muslims are rising. That Hardwar area we have already considered part of the western UP. But this Udham Singh Nagar has about 23% Muslims. And the growth in the Kumaon region as a whole, from 61 there were 5% and then 12% in 2011. This detail is extremely important. Somebody should look into what is happening in Uttarakhand, because Uttarakhand is not naturally a place for the Muslims to be there. And next. When you look at the western UP, another important factor is that of the growth there, the growth is both in the rural and the urban areas of the Muslims. But Muslims are highly concentrated in the urban areas. So many towns are becoming not only Muslim majority, but overwhelmingly Muslim over the last decade. This has given the relative urban ratio of the Muslims. In India, Hindus are 29% urban, Muslims are 39% or 40% urban. In Rajasthan is 20 and 50. If you go to Tamil Nadu, it's 45 and 76. But then West Bengal, Assam, Muslims will be more rural. But in general, Muslims are more urban, and because of that, please next. In western UP, out of 154 towns in western UP, those districts of my consideration that I talked about, 103 are Muslim majority. And out of them, there are about 50 who are more than 80% Muslim. So that is kind of concentration there. And the growth has been very high in the last few years. Kerala was much in the news. It was 60% Muslim in 81, is more than 80% Muslim now. Kandla is an important town. That one of the reasons is that the person who started the Tabligh Jamaat in Mewat was born in Kandla. He moved from Kandla to. They were 47% in 81 and they are 70% now. And they went from 56 to 71. And like that, the increase in the last 2-3 decades has been of the order of 20% or more. And I don't have the data beyond that, but I'm told the next 4 or 5 years after 2011, the increase has been even more acute. And this shows in the towns. Like I've gone to Kandla town earlier also. The Kandla town is palpable, the feeling that you are in an alien place. That feeling is palpable. It's been so for 3-4 decades it's been like that. But most of Western UP, if you go to, you will have a palpable feeling. In fact, I don't know, how much time I have taken already?
That's 2:40.
Yeah, 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay. Okay, let's move further. Then, Bihar is not important. Next. Jharkhand, the growth has been fast from 8% in 51 to 14%. Next. But in Bihar and Jharkhand, this area is important. This to the eastern part, what was the earlier Purnia district, and below that, what is the Santhal Pargana district. This is strategically very important area. This connects with the small bit of northern Bengal, and then Bangladesh begins, and across that is Assam. On the other side is Nepal. So strategically is extremely important, and in this area you see Kishanganj is 68% Muslim, Araria is 42%, then Sahibganj is 34%. The rise in this area, I'll just show the kind of rise it is. Okay, next slide please. It was 32% at the time of independence. They've gone to 46%. 14% rise in this small region, a percentage point rise. In fact, this area also I visited, and when you go near the border, even the BSF people will ask you, that sir, we don't know whether we are in India or we are in some other country. But go to the next slide. Similarly, Santhal Pargana region from 9% to 23% in this. Next. West Bengal, when you move from Santhal Pargana, then you come into West Bengal, and West Bengal, whole of West Bengal, from 19%, the Muslims have become 27%. But again, the most important region is which neighbors Bangladesh, and this side neighbors this region I showed you of Santhal Pargana. And next. So this belt in between, from to the left of this is Santhal Pargana and Purnia, rest of Uttar Dinajpur. This belt, all these whites that you're seeing, they are sub-districts, and most of them are 80% Muslim. This side of the right of it is 100% Muslim. That's the Bangladesh. And this, all the border belt is nearly 80% Muslim, is how it has become. Next. So in this region, this northern Bengal region, the rise has been from 40% in 1951 to 52% now. So about 20 percentage point had been added. And if this were the situation in 1951, this wouldn't have been part of India. Next. So this is a map that you look at this region and then go to Assam, Bangladesh, and I told you about the figures of this. Now we look at Assam. Next. Next. Okay, so let's move. In Assam, the Muslim percentage has gone up from 15 to 25, it was in 51, and now it has gone up from 25, it remained around 25 up to 71. And then suddenly it has increased to 34%. This is also a very massive increase, and this again is concentrated in certain belt. In that belt I can show you. Next. This belt is one of the most fertile belts of Gwalpara, Kamrup and Daran region, Nagaon region, which we used to call. And then this Barak Valley region. These are the two regions which are most fertile and where the Muslim growth has been the maximum. And like in that northern Bengal, most of the sub-districts in Dhubri, in Bongaigaon, Barpeta, Dharan are not Muslim majority, they are overwhelmingly Muslim. And most of the data shows that Hindus are being forced to vacate those districts. So if you, next slide please. No, one before. You come back. Okay. So in this Goalpada, Kamrup, Dharan, Nagaur region, that belt that I was showing, which connects with Bangladesh and with the Santhal Pregna, Purnia and northern part of Bengal. The proportion of Muslims was only 14% in 1901. It was 32% 51 and it's about 45% now. So in fact the whole of this area, if you put it together, next. Muslim now are 45% in this border belt, which is a vast border belt of the next. Kachar also they have gone up from 38 to 48, but Kachar doesn't form part of this belt. Beyond this Muslim belt, starting from Purnia up to Assam, is 45% Muslims. And there will be about 4 to 5% Christians in the belt. So that whole belt, Indians are now, Indian religions are in the minority. Then we have this area of the northeast. And this, perhaps all of you know, this is entirely Christian, except for Arunachal. Let's go next. Next. In Meghalaya, in 51, there were about 25% Christians, now there were 75%. And if you look only at the scheduled tribe population, 85% of them are now Christian. The few that are left, I think, need help. They are this Hajawans and Rabas, and they are living in a very difficult situation, but they are insistently remaining in that. But there is very little left now. Mizoram became 90% Christian in 51 itself. I don't know what happened in this decade of 41 to 51. What was the political agreement made that all these places became so much Christian within that decade. And it has remained 90%, what more could be done anyway? The remaining 9% there of the scheduled tribes are Buddhists, they are Chakmas. They are not going to change. Manipur, again, there was increase from 5 to 11. Even now the proportion is below 41%. But amongst the scheduled tribes population, 97% of Manipuri scheduled tribes are Christian. Manipur, if you know, geographically, there's this valley and there are the hill states. Hill states are now all Christian. The valley is a Vaishnava valley. It has remained so for very long. Beside the Vaishnavas, there is a group of Muslims, and there's always tension between the Pangal Muslims and the Vaishnavas. Next. Arunachal Pradesh is the main story of the last census. Arunachal Pradesh, unlike the rest of Northeast, Arunachal Pradesh was what we know as NEFA, Northeastern Frontier Agency. It was militarily ruled. There was not under civilian rule up to 61. After 61, around 71, it was brought in civilian rule. So there was no possibility of Christian growth there. But as soon as it came under civilian rule, in 81 there were 4% Christian, 91 10%, 2000 19%, and now they have gone up to 30%. This is all the rest that I have shown Christian happened mostly between 41 and 51. This has all happened in the last 2 decades, when everybody was aware that this is happening and something should be done. In Arunachal Pradesh, actually the main tribe of Nisis is now 64% Christian. And in Tirap area, there are the Vanchos and Noctes. They are almost entirely Christian now. And I've gone and met those Noctes, some of them. And they cry when you go, you don't know. They'll tell us you don't know what is happening to us. We are being, the way we are being forced to convert, but the numbers are showing that they are mixed. I don't know if it's the time, but this is a very important area. This is the other part where Christians have been important in Santhal Pargana, and middle is the Ranchi area, and Christians have been there in Ranchi for some time, so we don't have to concern about it. In Santhal Pargana, there has been extraordinary growth of Christians in the last, as of Muslims, in the last 2-3 decades. And most important is this Gajpati Kandhamal area of the lower of Odisha, about which we have heard, perhaps if you have the news. Give me the next slide. Next slide. Also next slide. In Kandhamal, the Christians have gone from 9.39 to 20%. And in Gajpati, they have gone from 18%, from 11% to 38%. This is a very large growth. This happened in the last 2 to 3 decades. The attempts to counter this have met with great resistance, as we have heard about it, the kind of tensions. Okay. But this is going to be an area of great contention about if something can be done, we should do it. But next. Oh, I'll tell that story some other time. And the Christians had gone up very high. They have come down to much lower. But next. Next. I did this small exercise. I put together the Christians and the scheduled caste percentages in Andhra over the years. You see that if the Christians increase, the number proportion of scheduled caste decreases. If the Christians decline, the proportion of scheduled caste increases. And the sum remains unchanged. This is perhaps one of the next. This in Guntur district, it is looking even more evident. This is one of the quantitative proof of how what is called the crypto-Christians, how the scheduled castes are converted to Christians and then not reported to the secular authorities. In fact, Christian Church defines crypto-Christians as people whom the church knows to be Christians, or known to the church as Christians, but who are not known to the secular state. That's their formal definition. And this is a quantitative proof of how much that happens. Tamil Nadu, there is parts of Tamil Nadu which are Christian, but most important part there is the next, Kanyakumari. Next. In Kanyakumari, there has been consistent growth of Christians from 30% to 47% they have gone. And Kanyakumari, this growth is very important because I think the new Hindu movement began with the from the Vivekananda Rock. And next. Muslims in, there are not many, there are as many Christians as Muslims in Tamil Nadu. They are limited to Ramanathapuram, Nilgiris and Vellore. But Muslims in these 3 areas, Ramanathapuram, Vellore and not so much in Nilgiris, are extremely assertive, politically extremely assertive, much issue. Next. Kerala, the lower part is Christian, the upper part is all Muslim, and we are coming to that. Next. 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 In Kerala, if you look at this is an important graph. The Muslims have gone, they were 17% in 1901, they were 17% even in 51. In the first part of the century, they were not growing, and then they have grown to 27%. Christians were 13% at the beginning of the century, became 22% in 61, and after that they have been slightly declining. But the Indian religiousness has been continuously declining. They have declined from 69 to 55, declined from 14%, half of it to the gain of Christians, half of it to the gain of Muslims. Because of next, because of this phenomenon, I will want to show you this. Kerala is given as an example of repeatedly of a state which is very advanced, which is highly literate, which is also rich. And in all social parameters will be very high. These are those social parameters. The Hindus, Muslims and Christians are all highly literate. Even the female literacy is Hindus and Muslims almost equal, 91 and 91. But the child ratio, Christians are 8.9, Hindus are 8.9 per 100, and Muslims are 14 per 100. So even when you have a highly developed population, this gap doesn't seem to change. In fact, Kinkley Davis did a very detailed study of explaining the excess growth of Muslims. And at the end of all his calculations, he said that there are various parameters on which you can explain that. But after you have explained all the social parameters, there's still something left. And that's peculiar to the Muslims. So, next. These are the age parameters. If you look at for Kerala, if you look at Christians, they are looking like this will be like the graph of California. Hindus are reaching nearly that. Muslims are of Kerala are similar age distribution as of the rest of India. So it's not much different. Next. Only one more thing I want to say. This, whatever growth is taking place of Muslims in northern Kerala is seeping up into Konkan and Dakshin Kannada. Dakshin Kannada district has seen considerable growth of Muslims, and Dakshin Kannada component, this Dakshin Kannada plus Udupi, is up now 24%. That's one more look at the last. And next, have one more look at that map. Jammu is not with us. Jammu Kashmir Valley is not with us. Whatever we say, is there because we have put arms. Is there at the moment we take out? Is a problem. Western UP is extremely problematic. Every day we are having problems. There is great increase in the Muslim presence. Then this belt from Purnia, Santhal Pargana, northern Bengal and Assam. This is now more than 45% Muslim, about 5% Christian. So the Indian religionists, we said that in the whole of India, they will become a minority in 2061. They are minority here, they are minority in that belt. So from Purnia onwards, the whole of this belt is not, is a belt where Indian religions are having a very difficult time. Then in the coastal region of Kerala, there are hardly, there's continuous decline. So this is how India looks like. I know it's a very important question to answer as to how we correct this. That I think will come in the discussion. But knowing that this is what is happening in India is important in itself. Thank you.